Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, December 23rd, 2024. My name is Sam Seder. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live to tape steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA, live from the Christmas-sponsored studios.
Yeah.
It is one of our famous best of shows. We've been doing this now for over a decade. Today, we present to you one of our best ofs from 2024 that actually happened in 2023. One of the idiosyncrasies we have about the best of is that we cut off. We do not allow best ofs that happen in the last 2 months of the show to be included in the, well, okay, that was dramatic. To be included in the runoff for best of. Mm-hmm. But what we do is we do it so it's actually have sort of like a fiscal year of best of that runs from essentially beginning of November, really mid-October to mid-October of the next year. So this one is from 11/27/23. That's November 27th, 23, the day before my birthday that year. Naomi Klein, professor of climate justice at the University of British Columbia, author of Doppelganger, A Trip into the Mirror World.
I mean, and of many other books that everybody should be reading. Like, yes. Not just her latest. Naomi Klein, got one of my true, inspirations in this field, right? She's just, always... But great politics, but always seeing things in a different, unique way. And the way she puts things, she's just a phenomenal thinker and writer. And so getting to talk to her is just it's very cool. If you had told me this in college, I would have totally geeked out over it.
Very fun to have conversation with her. I would also say she was a producer on, her husband made a documentary. This was 20 years ago now, called The Taking, which... is about some factory workers taking over their factory and turning it into a co-op. That's worth watching. But of course, there's no logo, and
the shock doctrine.
Shock doctrine also hugely important. There's a lot you can learn from the shock doctrine. I mean, ostensibly about Iraq, but there's a lot you can learn about that. Disaster capitalism, and in this book, she sort of bases off the theme of how she has gotten confused over the years with Naomi Wolf, who has completely lost her mind. Well, that of course is just in my opinion. I'm not a psychiatrist, and I have not examined her, but and the implications of that, and in many ways, I think sort of prescient for where we are now. To be honest with you, in terms of the post-Trump world. But right now, you and I are on vacation.
We are.
Bradley's on vacation, even though we're here now. So we have crossed a time-space continuum. In addition to this, well, we've got more to talk about. First, a couple of words from our sponsors. We have sponsors today, or in the future. I want you to forget everything you know about fasting. Prolon by L Nutra is the only patented fasting mimicking diet that combines the benefit of prolonged fasting with a science-backed nutrition plan so you can hit your health and weight loss goals without actually having to give up all food. I did this once in 2024, at the beginning of the year. I did it while we were doing the show, and nobody even noticed, although I think I had a little more energy.
It was surprising. When you told me you were going to do it, I thought you might be in bad shape, but you were fine.
Disaster.
You were fine.
But no, Prolon is a revolutionary plant-based nutrition program that nourishes the body while making the cells believe they're fasting. Now, I read into this stuff. It was developed out of the University of Southern California Longevity Institute. It is backed by leading U.S. medical centers. Prolon helps promote healthy blood sugar, support cardiovascular health, and reduce abdominal fat. And what it does is, in the first couple of days, like you go through different stages. One of them is ketosis, but then by the time you get to like the third stage, there is like some type of cellular regeneration that takes place. You can read about this stuff. It's actually, like I said, it's science backed. But Prolon, again, not a diet. Prolon is science. And all this starts with Prolon's 5-day program. Snacks, soups, beverages, all designed to keep your body in a fasting state. It ain't easy, but it's not as hard as you would think. My biggest problem was that Saul ate one of my like little chocolate tasting crisps that, you look forward to those at the end.
Got to keep those under lock and key.
But it's doable. And I felt great. I'm going to do it again soon, maybe even on this vacation. Right now, Prolon's offering the Majority Report with Sam Seder listeners 15% off their 5-day nutrition program. Go to prolonlife.com/majority. That's PROLONLIFE, prolonlife.com/majority for this special offer. Of course, we'll put a link in the podcast and YouTube descriptions as well as at majority.fm. And another sponsor of ours today, this is a place that or a company that we've been working, we've used their product for years. How do you get all the great merch on this program? Shop.majorityreportradio.com, powered by Shopify. And when you think of businesses that are selling through the roof, which apparently like Allbirds, that sneaker thing, or Aloe, or Skims,
I've gotten all three of those through Shopify.
You think about a great product, you think about brand and maybe excellent marketing, but often overlooked is the secret that the business behind the business are making selling super easier for shoppers. I should say selling for the sellers easy and buying for the shoppers easy and simple. And for millions of businesses, that business that's helping them is Shopify. Nobody does selling better than Shopify. It is the home of the #1 checkout on the planet. And apparently they have the not so secret Shop Pay that boosts conversions up to 50%. I believe that. I find that very convenient, actually, the Shop Pay thing. But
it is.
It means less carts going abandoned and way more sales going ka-ching. So if you're growing your business or you want to grow your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling and strolling, on the web, in your store, at your live show that you did, despite the fact that the election didn't go the way we wanted to. We were able to integrate our sales very easily with the merch and their online, whether it's in your social media feed, everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business. Get the same checkout that Aloe, Skims, and Allbirds uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/majority. All lowercase. Go to shopify.com/majority. Upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/majority. All right. We're going to take a quick break. No, I should just tell you that not only do we have Naomi Klein, but Matt has his Matt picks. That's actually your picks, and he just puts it on there. But little clips from YouTube. One or two, maybe,
that
are
gift.
Funny.
A gift. Yes. Holiday season.
As if, this is the big gift giving season. So we are on Christmas Eve, I guess. Right
I
now?
guess so.
23rd? I don't know how it works. I always thought Christmas was on the 23rd.
Well, it's not. It's famously on the 25th.
Well, I thought it was famously on the 23rd, but it turns out it's the 25th. So we got a couple more days until Christmas. So now here is Naomi Klein, and stick around for some of those YouTube clips. We will be back with more tomorrow. We got great shows this week. Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. Real pleasure to welcome back to the program Naomi Klein, professor of climate justice at the University of British Columbia, author of multiple best-selling, New York Times best-selling books, and her most recent Doppelganger, A Trip into the Mirror World, Naomi, it's great to see you. Matt just told me that he accidentally put Naomi Wolf into the. But this has been going on.
I was thinking about the thing.
We were going to go really into the mirror world. We're going to dive right into the mirror world.
You would not be the first people to do that, by the way. Yeah.
Well, I mean, this is this book is a little bit of a departure for you, I think, relative to the other ones that you and I have talked about over the years. And you're using this concept of doppelganger as a metaphor of sorts. I think 20 years ago when I started to interview you back for, I think it was like No Label, maybe at
No
that
Logo.
time. No
More
Logo,
mistakes,
sorry.
Sam. You're just screwing up right, left, and center.
I know. But that's
No
what
Labels
it was.
is a
Naomi Wolf
terrible
had a No
political
Label book. No, but I'm quite convinced I must have interviewed her once or twice earlier at that time. It's been sort of a fascinating 20 years, but also sort of exhausting. But let's start with this. It starts for you. It starts in seeing up in Vancouver, sort of these protests, these medical freedom protests. But talk about like just the sort of the genesis of and what's happening with this metaphor.
Yeah. So first of all, it's great to see you. Great to see you, Emma.
Great to see you.
It's a different kind of book in sort of tone and style. It's kind of more playful and experimental in the sense that it uses the doppelganger as a tool to look at all different kinds of ways that we double ourselves, right? So I happen to have a doppelganger. There are lots of people who do. I get perennially confused with Naomi Wolf, but the book is not about that. It's about the way that we create doubles of ourselves online. It's the way AI creates doubles of us. It's the way that we partition our political world into this kind of very reactive doubling where the right has a sort of replica copycat version of every social media platform, fundraising tool. They're even making their own money, on the Steve Bannon show. And also copycat arguments, like doublings of arguments. But we also, on the left side of the spectrum, are very reactive with them. So it's about all of that. My books have always tried to make maps of our political moment. I did that with the shock doctrine and with This Changes Everything. With this book, it's also a map of the kind of COVID moment and how we have changed, how our political culture is changing. And it's a weirder map because we are in weirder times. So it's trying to kind of wrap its arms around the prevalence of conspiracy culture and the way lots of people are kind of becoming doppelgangers of who they used to be, right? We all know people who have changed, and we're trying to understand, is this still the same person? How did this change happen? What are the financial incentives for this change? Are we the ones who've changed? We're all accusing each other of having been, become victims of like invasion of the body snatchers. So what is happening? And so Doppelganger tries to answer some of that.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
No, it just COVID is such an and you write about this obviously, but it's such an important moment to analyze that very dynamic because it was an accelerant in many ways. And you see the mirroring of certain arguments when it comes to COVID, right? Where the critique of big pharma on the liberal left side is the same kind of prism by which these anti-vaxxers choose to come at this argument, but it's quite, anti-humanist and also skeptical of expertise and aligned with the right at this point. What was that dynamic like writing about that?
Yeah, well, I think, Sam mentioned seeing these protests in the community where I live. I started the pandemic in the U.S. I had been teaching at Rutgers, and we were just kind of outside New York, and there was a little bit of this starting to happen, particularly outside of gyms, and it was mainly like the extremely religious and the extremely fit who were the first people to decide to not believe that COVID was real, right? So they were going, streaming into mega churches. With the community where I lived had a very large Orthodox Jewish community that was breaking various lockdown rules. And then there were the gym owners who were like, no, we demand the right to lift weights, even if this, and so, part of what I'm trying to understand is like, what is the common thread between these two? Like, why is there this kind of coming together of the wellness crowd and the sort of greenish left, right? And the far right. And because after I moved from the States to Canada to be near my parents who are in their 80s and not well, and this stuff is a lot stronger outside of big cities. And so I've talked to a lot of people who are in rural communities who've seen a lot of this, where it's not so much the far left as I call it the far right. Like, there are people who are interested in alternative health. Maybe they're interested in GMO foods, but mainly from a wellness perspective. And then you started hearing that people who are vaccinated are actually GMO people. Like the vaccine has. So it mixes and matches parts of the discourse that I recognize as somebody who's been part of the left for 30 years, and this we don't love big pharma, we don't like big tech, we don't like big agra, and it takes that and it warps it and it turns it into something that actually is not taking on these large businesses, that isn't taking on the trade rules that have allowed them to have such an outsized impact as the movements that I've been a part of have done, and it kind of pivots it. And suddenly it's about immigrants, and suddenly it's about the schools are turning your kids trans. And so I'm trying to understand, like, how do you do that pivot? How do you take the yoga instructor who was concerned about a vaccine and turn them into a warrior against critical race theory? And all of that's happening.
I mean, I want to go back and sort of see if we can trace some of this, because back in, like in 2006, maybe it was, like, I had a buddy, he was living in rural Nebraska, and we would have these conversations where he's like, he seemed to be almost like politicized in the sense that he was like, Dick Cheney is horrible. And I'm like, you're absolutely right. And he's like, he is literally, I've been reading David Icke's and he's literally like a lizard person. And I'm like, wait, no, that's not it. It's not that he's a lizard person. It's all these policies he's doing. He's like, oh, you're just getting caught up in politics. And I'm like, wait, no, he's not really a lizard person. And it feels like that is sort of the same dynamic that's going on here, where on one level there can be some type of agreement, right? Like, pharmaceutical companies are bad, but there is a lack of sort of like an ideological underpinning that then, I mean, I think at one point you wrote, facts wrong, but feelings right.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is true of Wolf, my own doppelganger, and where this started to feel more serious to me was when she really made this right-wing turn and suddenly was on Tucker Carlson's show when he had one on Fox, and was going on Steve Bannon's show very regularly. And what she was talking about was this claim that the vaccine verification apps that we all downloaded onto our phones was actually a kind of a covert plot to bring, as she said, tyranny to the West, a Chinese-style social credit system, that these apps were going to be able to listen to our conversations wherever we were, know who we were meeting with. And the response from liberals online was like, oh, just crazy rantings, but also wait till they hear about cell phones. So it was a kind of a knowing sneer, right? Like, we all know that it's actually our cell phones that are tracking us in these ways. But that really struck me as something very interesting. And it explained why this was getting the kind of traction it was, because, do we, people on the left side of the spectrum have a plan for what to do about surveillance capitalism? We all know it's real. We all know that there was supposed to be something happening under the Biden administration, but very little has happened. I know they're trying, but, our data is not safe. Our cell phones really have outrageous capacity to keep track of us. And so that's the kind of feelings that they get right? So she's taking all of our collective surveillance fears that are real and justified, and very little is happening. And we are having this kind of sneering reaction to it because we're not doing anything about it, I would argue, and pivoting it onto something that feels like you could do something about it. Like, we could just get the apps off our phone, right? And that's the appeal of all of these conspiracy theories, is that they tap into very real fears and anger about real inequality and injustice. But then, like you say about the lizard people, the story becomes not this is a system that is rigged and we need to change the system and maybe we need democratic socialism. There's this group of lizard people. They meet every year at Davos. Let's get the lizard people. And that's the kind of narrative structure of QAnon, but it really is the narrative structure of every conspiracy theory. And certainly the most ancient conspiracy theories, anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, right? Like there's this cabal of Jews. And that's why, back to the 1800s, anti-Semitism was described as the socialism of fools, right? It is how you understand injustice and inequality if you don't have a structural analysis of capital. And so you're going to believe that there's a room somewhere. And then, the QAnon story of there's going to be a great storm. There's going to be a moment when Donald Trump leads the white hats to arrest all the black hats and send them to Gitmo. Like that's the story that they're telling. And, I'm sure as both of you have been, around the left for a long time and pointed out injustice and inequality for a long time, you can imagine the appeal of a story that says there's actually going to be a day of accountability, right?
Well, that sounds like religious. It sounds like religion when you say that. I mean, to Sam's point about your friend in Nebraska, where he thinks Dick Cheney is a lizard person, it's an anti-political construction. It's a more, the facts wrong, feelings right construction is one of emotion and one that eschews political solutions and structural change for essentially demons amongst us. And then, I think some of that mirror world is the manipulation of kind of spirituality, which had been in many ways connected to the left in previous kind of political collaborations and contingency and cohorts, to an entirely different anti-political, anti-solidarity, very isolated system of complete paranoia that's been manipulated in that way.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. But the Dick Cheney example is a good one, right? In the sense that it points to the way that conspiracy culture on the right, which is absorbing parts of the left in real time, and we've all seen it, feeds off of impunity and left failures to hold people like Dick Cheney accountable, right? Like in a just world, Dick Cheney would have faced some accountability for the lies that led to the Iraq War. For the fact, I think, Sam, probably the first interview we had way back when was probably having to do with Halliburton's contracts, that Dick Cheney oversaw. And so I think that this level of impunity that we have in our culture is profoundly corrosive. And I think it unhinges people. Like, I think bearing witness to the lack of accountability over so many decades eventually pushes some people into the arms of this sort of more religious narrative that promises some almost otherworldly level of accountability.
Well, let's break down these sort of the elements of how we got, because I also distinctly remember, that guy, I don't want to harp too much on him anymore, but he was, an early Alex Jones fan. And, my idea of Alex Jones, 15, 20 years ago was, if this guy didn't exist, the CIA would invent him because he's taking people down. He's identifying a problem, right? Like the world is, we don't have much power in this world. And he's saying it's, people drinking blood at the Bilderberger group or whatever it is. And it completely, depoliticizes. It mystifies and depoliticizes. So we have that element going on. And you mentioned the lack of accountability.
And the thing about depoliticizing, though, that is slightly, I think we should be clear on what we mean by depoliticizing. From a kind of a strict Marxist perspective, it's a depoliticization and a mystification. But from a Steve Bannon perspective, it's like extremely strategic and political, and it has a political plan.
Exactly. Yeah. That's what I want to ask you about, the different sort of components that exist here. Like, for instance, when we talk about Naomi Wolf, I remember at the end of the Bush years, she was really getting into the authoritarian nature of the Bush administration. Also, with another guy who was a very frequent guest of mine, was Mark Crispin Miller, who was also getting into that at that time. They have followed similar trajectories since then. and
our friends, yeah,
and our friends, because I do think that's also part of it. Is like there's support networks that take place here, but so that authoritarianism.
And with someone like Mark, 9/11 trutherism is a gateway.
Yes, but that again is another thing where you have a vacuum of accountability on some level, and people needs to rush in. I mean, Mark was also like heavily involved in like the election stuff, but there was some real questions about our elections. When you have,
there's always a little bit of truth, right. And there are always progressive failures that are being fed off of, right? And this is where in the end the book ends up being about how the right is creating a doppelganger of the left, taking pieces of a left agenda that I recognize, but we have abandoned. And this is where, we may still think, oh yeah, we're the people who are taking on big pharma. We're the people taking on big tech. We're the people taking on these free trade deals. But are we? Like, when's the last time we really did,
Right.
And we've actually been focused on a lot of other stuff. And that deep anti-capitalist critique that I think is really central to any kind of robust left has taken a back seat. And somebody like Bannon he's a strategic guy. And, that's what he did in 2016 with specifically free trade, right? Union guys who'd voted for Democrats in 3 election cycles, who'd promised to open up those trade deals that had deindustrialized their communities, and then proceeded to, advance more of those deals. And he said, come on over here, and Trump said, I'm going to renegotiate the deals and I'm going to bring the jobs back and so on. And what I see happening on the right with not when I talk about Bannon, I'm talking about the fact that he has been part of building a global network of far right political parties. One of them just got, a majority, the largest share of votes in the Netherlands. And it's this mix and match, right? It is not the old right. It's not the neoliberal right. It's not Dick Cheney's right. It is the right that is extremely xenophobic, extremely racist, transphobic, and mixing in, a critique of globalization, a critique of the trade deals. We're going to protect the social safety net from the immigrants, right? Giorgia Meloni as well, another one of his proteges. This is what he did when he left the White House, is he went off to form this international network of far-right political parties. So yeah, there's always a little bit of something there, but this, the thing about a doppelganger is that it's a way of looking in the mirror, right? I mean, if you read any doppelganger novel back to Dostoevsky, like it ends up being a confrontation with the self. And this is what, this exploration has been for me, is like, I'm not that interested in her. I'm interested in what the fact that people are like, why are these ideas gaining traction? How are our own actions on the left helping to feed that? What can we learn from this? How can we see ourselves more clearly? How can we do a better job to take away some of their power? And I think when you look at a figure like Sean Fain in the United Auto, like president of the United Auto Workers, and you see the kind of like real economic populism that he stands for, like we're going to stick it to the bosses in his Eat the Rich t-shirt. That's Steve Bannon's worst nightmare. Somebody actually taking on elite power, because then it exposes the artifice of this kind of charade that's going on the right. Like they're not taking on big tech. They're not taking on big pharma. They're feeding off of silences, abandonments, and pivoting over to their real agenda.
So I mean, if we were to look at this and we have, let's say, 2 sort of distinct tracks that are parallel in terms of how we've gotten to where we are today. We have, sort of on a personal level, someone may have like a certain desire for celebrity and wanting feedback that is positive, and there may be some trauma associated. Who knows where to take them down to a certain road? I mean, I'm talking in general. I'm not even thinking about anybody in specific. But in terms of movements, we have this lack of accountability, and we have, I guess, a frustration of nothing's being happening. Maybe that's a similar thing. Let's talk about like sort of like the circumstance that's taken place really over the past 10 years, because it feels like a lot of this got accelerated after, and it's tough to disaggregate, when Sanders' campaign ended and COVID happened, because that was basically the same month, right? Like, and but it does feel like there was a lot of people who thought there was a movement happening to address these things, and then in a month it's gone, and also we're in lockdown. Absolutely. And everything got jumbled then, because how do you this push to sort of like both emancipate us from COVID also involved like you low paid workers go first, and you're sort of the chum that we're going to put out there to keep our transition going, and things got really haywire there, and there's movements on the right that are funding this.
Well, yeah, and I think that if you think about something like school closures, right, and the way schools became such a battleground, masking policies, vaccination policies, and schools closing down and staying closed, in some cases for a very, very long time. The truth is, the main reason I moved back to Canada was because the schools were open in British Columbia. That's why I stayed. I moved back to be near my parents. I thought it was temporary, but when I realized I could send my kid to an open school, I was like, I think I'm staying. But that was a very big deal to me as a parent. I have a neuroatypical kid, and he needed to be in school. He couldn't do Zoom classes. That was not possible for him. And I think that there was when I say that we become reactive to what is going on in the mirror world, what I mean is that when an issue becomes their issue, so they're the ones talking about some of the problems with these policies, then we are just the ones just offering blanket support. Yeah, great, close the schools. Yeah, get everybody. Yeah, you need to get vaccinated to go to work, and download the app. And it's not true that the apps could listen to our phone conversations, but it is true that when you insert technology, you allow it to mediate people's access to spaces, that is going to exclude people based on wealth. It's going to exclude people based on all kinds of things. It's not a society I particularly want to live in. But when that started to become a right-wing issue, because it's being funded and propped up by people on the right who understand this to be strategic, then we're just the obedience people. And that is a gift to them, because it means more and more people are going to look for anyone who's talking about issues that they care about, and they're going to be the only ones. There is a lot at work. And obviously a big piece of it is the attention economy. When you talk about the past 10 years or a figure like Alex Jones, there have always been conspiracy theorists, but I don't think never before have so many people been able to earn a living based on who can make the most outrageous claim quickly, right? So it's the collision of people looking to ways to make sense of the world, more and more shocking events, and there's going to be more of them in the era of climate change, and all of these people who are just ready, and unburdened by any need to the truth, to fealty to the truth, to just make whatever's going to get the clicks. And didn't
Trump also add to this sort of like binary nature in the way we respond? I mean, because I think it's even lost in the context of the school shutdowns, because the unions were basically saying, the teachers union were saying like, we don't want to go in until it's safe. Yeah. And that doesn't mean that until COVID's gone. That means until we expend the money to put things like air filters in a school, or to make sure that we have an ability to have some distancing when we eat, which of course we have no social structure in which to provide any of that stuff and to address any of that stuff. And so it was not a question of like, we don't want to go into school. It was like, we don't want to go into school if it's going to be a meat grinder.
Exactly. And so this is where it intersects with, 40 years of neoliberal economic policies that have defunded the schools, that have defunded healthcare. And so it isn't just sending your kid to class, it's sending your kid to a class with 35 other kids and one teacher, and very little time outdoors and decrepit infrastructure and no, terrible air. So, but this points to what I mean by it's holding up a mirror to the left, and why we can't just be reactive. Look, I think people should get vaccinated. I think people should have been wearing masks. And I think a lot of those schools did need to be closed where COVID was surging. Absolutely. But that's not the end of the demands. If you have a robust left, you are demanding smaller classrooms. You are demanding, creative responses, more outdoor education. You're demanding more nurses, more doctors, real investments in public health care. Talk about the Bernie campaign, that juxtaposition here. Many of us were, including me, campaigning with everything we had for a candidate whose centerpiece of his campaigns was universal public health care. Yeah. So it isn't just that, these, like Bernie's collapse coincides with lockdown. It's also the collapse of the idea of universal health care coincides with the pandemic. And a huge part of the reason why the U.S. was hit as hard as it was is because it has such a dysfunctional healthcare system.
I think a lot of the real, like the huge death count in New York in those first a month or two was a function of Medicaid hospitals, public hospitals being shut down by Andrew Cuomo in the years prior to it by 20 or 30%. And so we can track, the death rates because of the lack of those hospitals.
Well, I think the bottom line, just one thing I would just say, and I feel like all of my responses are coming down to the fact that we actually need a real left. And we've had a very sort of online, very sort of personal branding based left. It hasn't been a fighting left. We're starting to see some examples of a left that is back on the picket line, that is back talking about economic justice. Also, we're seeing a resurgence of an anti-war left around the huge Palestine solidarity, ceasefire protests. And, I've been part of a lot of these conversations where people are saying, yes, we are demanding a ceasefire. We're demanding that Israel abide by a ceasefire and that this not be some little temporary 4-day thing, but that this actually be the beginning of peace with justice in the region. But also a new robust anti-war movement that understands colonialism, that understands imperialism, that understands capitalism, that isn't just about this one call to stop now. I think that's the best way to confront this weird political scrambling that we've been talking about. You're not going to fight it with content moderators. You're going to fight it by giving people a real alternative of social movements with political power that stand to change things materially in many people's lives.
Well, you have a chapter on Israel and Palestine, which is quite, relevant, obviously, even though I'm sure you wrote it before. You must have written this all before October 7th, obviously. And that is that essentially Israel's politics and its far-right politics are a doppelganger of much of the nationalism that you described that Steve Bannon's kind of accolades are displaying. So can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, the term doppelganger politics comes from a British academic named Carolyn Rooney, a scholar of Middle East studies, who describes Israel's politics as a doppelganger politics in the sense that the argument for Israel as a Jewish homeland, as a Jewish state, was the idea that the way to fight anti-Semitism was not to fight for universal values around and justice, but to have a fortress nationalist project. And it sort of accepted the premise that the reason why Jews have been targeted for millennia is because Jews don't have a state of their own. And so that's what Zionism offered. And it wasn't, not all forms of Zionism were as invested in this idea of a fortress state. That was always a more right-wing version of Zionism. There were always figures like Martin Buber, Hannah Arendt, who wanted a Jewish homeland to be part of an Arab federation. But that is not the Zionism that won. And the Zionism that won was this idea that we Jews will have a fortress state of our own and kind of put a gun to the head of anti-Semites and be safe that way. And I think the extreme their vengeance-fueled response to October 7th is a response to the fact that October the 7th showed that was not possible. It pierced the bubble of security without justice in Israel, which is what has been, since the Oslo process collapsed. You've had successive Israeli governments who have claimed that it would be possible to have a normal, secure life in Israel without any peace process whatsoever. And there would just be this ongoing grind and more fortressing, right? Like the wall is a relatively new development, post 9/11. And when that was breached on such a huge and horrific scale on October 7th, it wasn't, the whole project came into crisis. And this extreme response, which is like, it is, in my view, it is not about eradicating Hamas. It is about reestablishing this claim that it is possible to have this bubble of security without justice, without any kind of response to Palestinian rights. And it's not going to work. It's going to breed more violence. And that's why there's been, I think, such strong Jewish leadership in response and saying, this is madness.
It's like a white knuckled attempt to mow the lawn again, as it were, and it's just not. I don't, in the words of famed word, I think it was an Israeli general who said that was basically the way that they had decided to deal with Palestinians, but. I just want to go back just a little bit, just for a moment, in terms of like talking about these power dynamics and the where we can go in terms of we see the left sort of like reasserting power, or attempting to, through labor, essentially, in this country, and providing these answers. Like what? How much of like, I mean, how much of this is going to be, how much do we need to be in a bailing water phase before we are, sort of like building a ship? I mean, and can those be done simultaneously?
When you say bailing water, what do you mean?
Well, I mean, we're, in the short term, we're at sort of a precipice, it seems like, on some level, at least within this country's politics. I mean, there's no indication that the right is going in any other direction. I think Trump is an accelerant, both for the dynamic you're talking about and for the right wing moving forward, because he has he has no politics outside of what's in his best interest. And so he becomes almost sort of the perfect vehicle, even beyond an ideologue, who can get himself into trouble. Like a Ron DeSantis can, who I think is like in many respects, a true believer. His obsession with woke got him. He couldn't move away from that quick enough. But Trump has this sort of fluidity where it's like, I'm going to pick up these things that resonate, like, and that's where Bannon, I think he probably gets a lot of that from Bannon, is these are nascent sort of, or these are strands of sort of left leaning thought that I can adopt here, protect Social Security and Medicare, for instance, that I think make Trump particularly dangerous relative to sort of recapturing and rebuilding on the left.
Yeah, I mean, I think he does believe in some things. I think white supremacy has been a through line in his life, and it's truly an animating belief system. And you see it in the way he talks about himself. He's got a kind of obsession with genes. I think his xenophobia, his I think it's a true hatred of migrants who are not white, that, we need to, he's not that fluid. I think that is something that he, that animates his project. But I agree with you that, I hear things from people like, well, he really doesn't like war, like, and maybe he'd be, there's a vagueness there that I think is very politically useful for him, where people will claim that, well, he wouldn't have done what Biden is doing in terms of offering this kind of blanket support for Israel. I think that is not true. I think that's another one of Trump's true beliefs. And I think a lot of what we have been seeing in the past horrific months in Israel is the legacy of Jared Kushner, is the legacy of moving the embassy to Jerusalem, of this, these so-called Abraham Accords, which Biden continued.
Yep.
But, when I talk about security without peace, without justice, that all those accords with the Emirates, with neighboring Arab nations, that was all about, not like one of the reasons why people make peace with is an economic dividend, right? Like it becomes too expensive to make war, or to continue a grinding occupation. And what those accords were about was a normalization process, normalizing this grinding apartheid system. And a lot of what I have read post October the 7th has said that this has been was a major contributing factor of what Hamas was trying to do, of saying, like, you're not going to have normal, you're not going to sign a deal with Saudi Arabia. So this is the world that Trump built with help from his son-in-law. And I think it is one of his belief systems. And I think we've done a bad job of pointing that out. And part of the reason why we've done a bad job is because we're all terrified of what's going to happen in this election because of Joe Biden's horrific blank check to Israel, which they're trying to post facto after the deaths of thousands of kids, say, oh, we didn't really mean that. We want to put some guardrails up. We've got a really, really big problem, Sam. We have a huge problem.
Well, the irony is that Biden the other day said, I think Hamas did this because we were close to peace. And I was like, well, wait a second. How is it that you're going to be close to peace when you're not including the Palestinian people in any part of that conversation? Like, of course, that is an issue. And I share your concern in terms of like it's a dilemma in terms of like I can't imagine a Democratic president being worse in this instance. Like, in terms of the complete blank check that was given to Israel up to this point. And just even the delusion
it's a true bipartisan project. It's a true bipartisan project. But the fact is, Biden has overseen an unprecedented orgy of death. Yep. And that is going to stick to him. It's going to stick to the Democrats. We can blame try to blame the right for this, but that's just not going to work. It's not going to work. So I don't know how they right this ship. Personally, I think that Biden should not be the candidate. I think they're not going to be able to run away from this. And it's absolutely disastrous, but it's disastrous not because of conspiracy theorists, and not because of Trump, and not because of Steve Bannon. It is disastrous because of what they've done.
I'm not quite clear on what the calculation is, although, I was just citing before you came on Peter Beinart's piece in
He's a true believer.
In 2020. Yeah. That essentially Biden is just and Emma made the point there was also in the Senate, he got a lot of money in that, but from support. But that's, again, a chicken and an egg. Maybe they gave him money because that was his sort of belief system. And it's an anachronistic one in my mind. I mean, this is, maybe he watched Exodus. With Paul Newman, and that was we're still living in that world.
He said it was his meeting with Golda Meir in the 1970s. I mean, when we talk about a gerontocracy, like, I'm less concerned about his age as it comes to being the head of state. I'm more concerned about the age of his positions and what that indicates about policy towards Palestine.
I think that's exactly right, Emma. And I think, I think there are people of that generation who have a understanding of the lessons of the Holocaust and the pledge that we all grew up with of never again being never again to anyone, and understanding that genocide is not that it is that does not just mean Holocaust against Jews. We have a genocide convention that defines it as any deliberate attempt to eliminate in whole or in part an identifiable group or people. And when you have Israeli politicians saying we're going to turn them into a parking lot, we're going to wipe them out, calling them animals, that ticks the boxes under international law. And the reason we have international law is because of the Holocaust, but it's not to say that that is the only example of genocide. And now we're having people saying to say that this is genocidal violence is to deny the Holocaust, is to engage in hate speech. I mean, I teach on a university campus. We're experiencing outrageous censorship that violates the whole intent of the international humanitarian legal architecture that grew out of the Second World War and universalized it, right? And this is why I say, this was the Second World War was really a kind of a fork in the road where there were two kind of visions of never again. One of them was this, okay, let's understand what the patterns are that led to this, this crime against humanity, and let's try to draft laws that prevent it from happening ever again to anyone. And then you have this other notion that was not understood as being incompatible, but was let's also have a fortress state for the Jews, an ethno state. And it turns out you actually have to choose one or the other, and you have to apply it across the board. And you can't have a state that privileges one ethnicity. Because eventually that state is going to end up in conflict with that whole international legal architecture that universalized, that created laws against apartheid and segregation and collective punishment and eliminating a people in whole or in part. So I agree with you, Emma, that it is about it is about age in the sense that I think part of what we're seeing is this is regret about the Second World War and the fact that though the U.S. was part of the Allies that beat the Nazis, it turned away boats as did every single country that could have accepted Jews, and they're stuck in this kind of historical loop where they're constantly trying to get a do-over for the Holocaust, even if it means participating in another genocide. I believe it is an attempted genocide. When you have politicians saying, we are going to wipe them out, we want to push them into the Sinai, you should take them. I mean, when you have the Wall Street Journal publishing sitting Israeli politicians saying, you take the Palestinians, that is ethnic cleansing, that is genocide. When the people who are bombing them say that, like this is why you have hundreds of international legal experts saying it fits the definition. So in the name of never again, they're againing. That is what is happening. And yeah, I agree. That's part of the problem of a gerontocracy because they're so stuck in that historical loop. Not all of them, but a lot of them, because this is the formative
even Bernie Sanders.
The idea of having to quote John Kerry, you can have a Jewish state or you can have a democracy. And that was 8 years ago. I think he said that.
I forgot that.
Yes. I mean, shocking to think that John Kerry, but he had a couple of moments in his day. But so in dealing with this sort of within the sort of like, I guess, the personal realm, right? Like, I mean, if we know that from a movement level, it is about organizing and largely through our labor in some instances to sort of like affect change and begin to sort of address these the vacuum of answers in, whether they're material answers or sometimes, sort of explanations, I think, which conspiracy and sort of an anti-authoritarianism that is unhinged and distinct from any type of ideological bearing, I guess. Like, what do we do on an individual level?
Well, it's interesting around the conspiracy, because one of the things I get into in the book is the way anti-Semitism has always been used to damage left-wing coalitions. And back to the first failed Russian Revolution in the early 1900s, before the successful one, there was an attempt to overthrow the Tsar, and the Jewish Labor Bund was absolutely central as part of this, which was a left-wing labor coalition of Jews that also had militias. And after that revolution failed, the Tsar's response was twofold: one, to offer some minor, like a weak parliamentary democracy, not real democracy. And the other was to unleash the hounds of anti-Semitism onto this coalition that had almost had a successful coalition, and to distribute the protocols of the Elders of Zion, and to pit the Christian working class against the Jewish working class. And this led to some of the bloodiest pogroms in history. Now, I think what we're seeing, which is simply to say that conspiracy, like the idea that there is a group that there's a room somewhere where the elders are plotting and are figuring it all out, has always been a political project. It is an elite protecting political project. It's not apolitical. It serves elite power very, very well because it distracts people and pits working classes against one another.
It's depoliticizing on some level because it becomes about mystification, right? I mean, if it's not a political structure that we're dealing with, if it's just a bunch of folks in a room who.
Well, it protects the existing political structure,
right? Okay.
Right? And it gives you a target. It's the oldest story in the book. What is happening now is that anti-Semitism and the fight against anti-Semitism, and we must fight anti-Semitism, is also being used to break apart left political coalitions,
right?
And all kinds of inter-ethnic divisions are being sown. Bannon is really good at this. I mean, he calls what he's building now inclusive nationalism, because basically what he's doing is peeling away, in the same way that he peeled away some white working class guys who had voted Democrat and brought them over to Trump. Now he's trying to do it with Latino and Black men who are upset that they think their teachers are turning their kids trans, and he's like, "Come on over, we can work with this," right? But this is what they're doing. I mean, maybe we're disagreeing over terms. I do see it as a very political project, but what it is doing is steering away from a critique of structures, a socialist project that would seek to build different structures. So what do? We stick together. We work through it. We have zero tolerance for Islamophobia, racism, transphobia, anti-Semitism. I mean, this is why. I think it is very, very important that we have a moral left that stands strong against the targeting of civilians and for international law, regardless of the context. Because how are we supposed to say that Israel needs to abide by international law if we're saying that Hamas doesn't need to abide by international law? But we need to be guided by values. We need to be guided by morals. We need to have a absolutely firm line on anti-Semitism and not give into any of these, temptations to believe that there's some room somewhere. And we need to build the alternative, which is that a left that is focused on real systems of power and proposing alternatives, which brings us back to why it was such horrifically bad timing that a political project that was bringing people out of their, not just their individual identity groups, but also the individual self that is the promise of capitalism, right? Like, you're going to improve yourself, you're going to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Bernie's campaign, which brought people together, was not me, us, right? And it wasn't like, that you don't matter, but that there is an us, that you don't need to confront these systems on your own, that you can be part of a movement that is taking on medical debt, that's depersonalizing it, that's taking on student debt, that's fighting for real systemic responses and solutions like universal public health care, and a $15 minimum wage. These are all examples of what we need to be doing. I think what we learned from the Bernie campaign is that a campaign is not a political campaign. An electoral campaign is not a sturdy enough structure to hold the left, right? And so when Bernie loses, and it wasn't fair, and there was the whole party ganged up on him, as was totally predictable. But when that happened, then we were just kind of dumped in a sea of me, like all of us who had been part of this not me us. It was suddenly me, 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 me. And that's when you saw everybody turning on each other. And then, yes, it coincided with lockdown. And so we weren't able to gather.
It coincided with the most isolated you could probably be under any context, right? Like everybody go home.
Let's not
and be
forget
with
Black Lives Matter and that spring, right, and the fact that people came into the streets despite the lockdowns, and acted with incredible solidarity and in multiracial coalition, Black led. That was a really, really important rupture, right? And I think that. I think some of those coalitions fell apart in part because they were trying to kind of maintain themselves over Zoom and the sort of interstitial moments when people in movements are able to be together and maybe cut each other some slack weren't there. I mean, that's part of the story, but it's not the whole story by any means.
Maybe a path forward, I guess, just to bring it back to what you were saying about the hopefully the anti-war movement maintaining itself and being unceasing is a solidarity movement that opposes nationalism in all of its forms, whether it's ethnic or religious nationalism, which I think dovetails nicely with the racial protest that for equality that you describe. Because we've said this on the show, when it comes to Zionism, it's not about the Jewish part of Jewish nationalism. It's the nationalism that's the problem. It's not the Christian part of Christian nationalism that's the problem. It's the nationalism part. And you can apply that to all of the other contexts that you describe of these resurgent kind of nationalist far-right movements internationally. Yeah. That could be, I think, maybe a big umbrella term to combat many of the things that we're talking about.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And I think that, this is why, when I eavesdrop on various conversations that are happening on the, more Zionist, in more Zionist parts of my family, and, what are the stories that are being told to rationalize these war crimes? It's fear. It's fear that if the boot is lifted off of Palestinians' necks, even for a moment, then they will do to Jews what Jews did to them in the Nakba and have just been doing to them, which is ethnic cleansing. And when you have Hamas leaders that go on, Lebanese television and say, yeah, that's the plan, it doesn't help because those clips get played over and over and over again in Israel, but that, what you're speaking to, Emma, is the fact that there needs to be a principles-based, like a values-based, principled-based left that is standing up to nationalism in all of its forms. And so that means that it doesn't get to be Hamas's turn to ethnically cleanse the Jews. Like that's not going to be the vision of justice. And we will stand up to that in the same way. And I think that people aren't hearing that enough. I don't think people are hearing that. I think Jews aren't hearing that enough. I think Israelis aren't hearing that enough from the left of saying, that's not the vision of the future that we're going to allow to happen. And the fears are not without any basis. I think one of the lessons of, I was reading Vincent Bevan's book, Until We Burn, about he calls it the decade of the mass protests. And he's talking about the Arab Spring, and he's talking about all of these huge mass mobilizations that have come from the left, but have often failed. And often what has happened is that there's been a political vacuum that gets opened up through mass movement. And if you aren't ready with what your vision is to fill that, and if you don't have a political project, then somebody else is going to fill it for you, right? And what happened in Egypt was that you had like a big, largely secular youth movement in Tahrir Square that didn't have a political program, that wasn't ready to take power, and the Muslim Brotherhood entered into that vacuum, and then was violently overthrown. And now you have Sisi, who's worse than Mubarak. But the lesson of that tragedy and it's ongoing because so many incredible activists remain behind bars in Egypt, is, when we resist, we can't just be saying no. We also have to have a plan for the yes, and we have to have these legible values and principles of what we stand for, because it isn't without basis to have a fear that Hamas wants to ethnically cleanse, especially when you have leaders who go on television saying that that's what they want. That doesn't mean that is what will happen, but it does mean that we have to be honest about the sort of landscapes that we're in.
Is that when you talk about creating uncomfortable coalitions in the book? What specifically are we talking about in that regard?
I mean, I think any good coalition is uncomfortable. If it's comfortable, it means it's probably not wide enough. I think partly what I'm talking about, Sam, is that, I think that there's some sort of very reactionary anti-identity politics discourse on the left, where it's like this idea of like, we all have to put our identities aside and come together in this universalist mush kind of, and I think honestly, that's partly why Bernie couldn't go all the way. I don't think Bernie could totally understood that there wasn't going to, that the us had to have a lot of different positionalities in it. And that we can come together, but we're not going to check our pasts at the door, our different ways in which we enter coalition. And that recognizing that we come with these past traumas, intergenerational traumas. I think these anti-war coalitions that are coming together are uncomfortable, and really uncomfortable conversations are happening along the lines that we're talking about right now. Coming back to Israel-Palestine, what I mean about being clear about values and building on what you were saying, Emma, about being clear that it's the nationalism that is the problem. One of the things I do at the end of the book is look at the ways in which the Nazi project was a kind of doppelganger of colonialism, and Hitler was very clear about this. He talked, he was fascinated with the Western frontier in the U.S. and in Canada. And the German idea of Lebensraum, of elbow room, of needing more space, that was the Eastern frontier. And he would draw direct parallels between the Slavs as his Indians, right? And he's like, we're gonna get rid of them in the same way that the Americans did and the Canadians did. And do we ever think of them when we have bread? I think he said when we have bread with wheat from Canada, do we ever think of the Indians? He was very clear about what he was learning, also from U.S. Race law, from eugenics in the U.S. So it wasn't a doppelganger in the sense of like, obviously he did things that had never been done before. It was a Fordist genocide. Nobody had killed as quickly and on a scale like that before. But he learned a lot. He learned a lot and he talked about how the British came up with the idea of concentration camps and so on. And there was a lot of denial, certainly in the way I was taught the Holocaust in my Jewish education, in my Jewish day school. We never learned any of these connections, and there were a lot of anti-colonial scholars, Aimé Césaire, who talked about the Holocaust as colonialism turned inward. W.E.B. Du Bois saying, in the 1950s, there's nothing that Hitler did that had not been done to, the quote unquote darker nations around the world. But this is not what we learn in schools, right? We learn this very, very exceptional story. Why does that matter? It matters because we did not see the connections between race law in the U.S., the Indian reservation system, residential schools. Because we didn't look at these connections, then it somehow seemed plausible that as a form of twisted reparations for the Holocaust, Jews get to be colonizers in Palestine, get past the mantle of whiteness as literally reparations. Like when Germany gave reparations to the state of Israel, they were explicit that this was reparations for their sins, that and they gave a huge amount of money in the form of infrastructure support for the early state. So this is it's only possible to imagine this as reparations if you are not seeing the connections and what Hitler learned from colonialism. And so, and this is why it's sort of extraordinary that we're not allowed to talk about Israel's settler colonialism, that this is somehow anti-Semitic. It's like a war on history. It's a war on memory. It's a war on understanding. We can't understand any of this, including the Holocaust, without understanding settler colonialism, because this is one long chapter that's just been moving locations.
Well, a lot to think about. Naomi Klein, the book is Doppelganger, A Trip into the Mirror World. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. It's always
Thank
great
you
to catch
both,
up.
Sam and
Yes,
Emma.
thanks so much.
I appreciated it. Take care.
Bye-bye.
This is a tough business.
What'd I do? You look very unhappy with me right now.
I just think that what you did to Tim Pool was mean.
Okay.
And look at how you've hurt his feelings.
She was offered a tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
Like, it's one thing, but look at how sad he's become now. How none of it is worth it for him anymore. He could be making millions. Instead, he's making millions and having to work a little.
Do harder work.
This is a clip of Tim Pool, I guess from just the other day.
Do we know who this guy is?
Which one?
This guy we're looking at.
This is Phil LeBon. He's a Tim Cass guy. He's actually, funnily enough, a singer of an emo band called All That
Oh,
Remains. Yeah.
right. He's All That Remains flunky. I got you.
I don't even know what that means, but is he responsible for the video where Tim Pool is like running with his sunglasses on through?
He might actually be related
saving
to
the world.
I bet he corresponds with Phil for his music. He's got it. Phil's a real musician.
Okay, so Tim's upset. I'm sorry to hear.
Yeah, how to best set this up?
Tim Pool is upset because something happened on the show yesterday, and he's calling out the guy who made it happen.
And he's reassessing his career.
His
trajectory.
diarrhea?
No, different.
Oh, that was something else.
No, this is sort of verbal diarrhea.
Might do if they get in charge of the government while they're
from my lefty friends.
What?
You know, is like
I think it's only fair that I don't take the heat for what you said, Jesse, and I'm not trying to be a dick, but I'm getting people attacking my character now for having had to take the show down because you made 2 allusions to killing people. So I'm not trying to be a dick right now, but like I've got 500 messages of like, what the fuck are you doing? Why are you taking the show down? Are you fucking with us? You're trying to make money.
So I thought YouTube took the show down.
No, I had to take the show down.
Okay.
I had to take the show down because you made 2 allusions within like the span of a couple minutes to murdering people.
Okay.
After I explicitly stated in the pre-show, do not make allusions to violence. Then went on to explain, we keep having people come here and saying they want people killed, or people should kill people, or they can be killed, or things like that. 18 minutes into the show, you had
You're not having real
conversations.
Pause it for 1 second. I want you to go back just about 10 seconds, 15 seconds, but I think if you find yourself saying, we keep having people come on the show who are making allusions to killing people or having other people killed and killing and murdering and killing
places.
and fighting and killing, I feel like if you say those words about your show, you may need a deeper dive into this. But apparently not. It's everybody else's fault, and this is some.
And he's not even mad about the killing people so far. He's mad he had to take the show down, and that he's pissed off his fans.
Yeah, he pissed off my fans. I got to do this, or we're going to get demonetized.
And the funny thing is, it's not just YouTube. But go ahead, Bradley.
Go ahead.
To murdering people.
Okay.
After I explicitly stated in the pre-show, do not make allusions to violence. Then went on to explain, we keep having people come here and saying they want people killed, or people should kill people, or they can be killed, or things like that. 18 minutes into the show, you had made 2 allusions to, one was the helicopter thrown over the Pacific Ocean. That's kind of like fuck, we're gonna get hit for that probably, but we'll see what happens. But then you said you can go kill the human smugglers for all I care, and it's just like, that's it. Like, it's not a YouTube thing. It's Rumble would take us down for this. I've had the conversations with Rumble about it, and so it's a question of
free speech
for the people who are right now who are slamming me, claiming that it's a big news day, and I intentionally took the show down for fake reasons to make money. No matter what platform we're on, that show would be removed. Okay. And we would face legal liability.
Pause it for 1 second. I just want to make it clear. Yes, somebody asked this question. I want to make it absolutely clear. before Digby came on, I had to give her the talk. Don't be calling for the specific killing of any individuals, and don't get confused by the two weapons I have behind me. That's not what we're about here.
This is not a pro-killing podcast. Or at least it can't be, because we're going to get demonetized, even on Rumble for that, bro.
It's one thing to like allude to the mass killing of leftists in South America in the 70s by throwing them out of helicopters, but don't say actually go kill the human traffickers.
Yes, you can't.
Because that's an explicit death threat. I can maybe get by on the throwing people out of helicopters thing if we just say it's a joke or something like that and people don't know what it's a reference to.
Also, Tim, keep this in-house. Like, you don't need to do this on air.
This is an off-air discussion.
Except you do need to do it on air.
There's a lot of things bothering you, and you shouldn't even talk about it, because I think you're responsible for this.
I probably am in a certain way, but like Tim is the kind of manager, I'd imagine, that doesn't necessarily want to have a conversation that's a little tough. He might need to, have a little bit of bravery for an off-camera discussion, but he probably feels more emboldened when he's on air, that he knows
because you're not having real conversations.
Reaction. Yeah.
Who are slamming me, claiming that it's a big news day, and I intentionally took the show down for fake reasons to make money.
Look on that guy's face. He doesn't know how to respond.
No matter what platform we're on, that show would be removed, and we would face legal liability. And so the question is, can we have a show if we persist? That show would be deleted, and that would be the end of it.
Okay.
So all I can do is say, okay, well, that's it. I tried. We take it down. That's all I can do, I suppose. And so now I get all the flack for it. It's not a fun job.
It's the best job. Have you as the beanie?
I mean, I could just host my morning show where it's just me, and it makes $1 million a year, and not have to worry about anybody coming in. I don't have to worry about employees dumping bacon grease down my drains and clogging up our septic system. I don't have to worry about getting swatted 15 times and getting death threats all the time, and then having people accusing me of trying to rip them off to make money because people come on the show and like don't respect the space or whatever. Like, man, it is stressful. I was just talking about how people come in here and they just vape, despite we like it's wild, dude. It's absolutely fucking wild. Like,
look at that guy's face.
Tens of thousands of dollars every week to
Tim's having a meltdown.
And then we get people who come out here and they just don't care about anything we do. And I'm not saying you are, it's just like it builds up on you. And then when you are forced to make that difficult decision, it's all my fault. So I'm like, shit, man. I had a conversation with this prominent industry professional, a year ago, and I was like, dude, when I was just doing my morning show, I was a millionaire. Working 6 hours a day, playing video games, going out for pizza, doing a morning podcast that was like number 50 in the world.
You were going out for pizza?
And we were like, let's do more. Let's take on the world. Let's fucking build culture. Let's do another show.
You're playing a game called capitalism.
Let's go to fucking war. And now all of that money that comes in pays for employees, pays for a building, pays for infrastructure, pays for cool shit. Everyone who's a member.
Cool shit.
Like my salary that I get paid just comes from the morning show for the most part. I say for the most part because there's profit. I'm not going to act like there's not profit.
Right, yeah.
But
my
the amount of money that we generate from membership.
Pause it for 1 second. Just to be clear, my salary comes from the morning show. Now, of course, I get shareholder distribution.
Skim a little bit off the top, yeah.
Profit. I mean, to be clear in that.
And that's his compound where they all like the idea that why is an employee putting bacon grease down your damn drain, Tim? It's because everyone's freaking living
Hire a
there.
plumber, dumbass.
Yeah. maybe just have an office space.
He's right. If you've got a septic tank, and really, I mean, largely speaking, first of all, you take the bacon grease and you save it. Okay, you put it in a jar, you save it because it's great with other stuff, but it's only going to last for so long, and then you got to throw it out. You scoop it out with some paper towels, or you take a spoon, you put it into the garbage. You don't put it down there, particularly in the winter. It coagulates. Mm-hmm. All right?
Sure, yeah.
I'm sorry.
We agree about that, but if it happens, that's what the money's for.
I mean, this is. Yeah, I mean, Sam doesn't want to do this show anymore.
Can't do it anymore.
It was so much easier when the Majority Report was just you. Just you. It was so, you were happy before you had to expand into things like the AM Quickie and the merch store.
live YouTube and then with Twitch. I gotta say, poggers. Oh, go ahead, keep going.
Member, like my salary that I get paid just comes from the morning show for the most part. I say for the most part because there's profit. I'm not going to act like there's not profit.
You're playing the game called capitalism.
The amount of money that we generate from memberships and from all the ad reads that I do does not go to my salary at all. So I quite literally could just stop timcast.com, stop timcast IRL, end all of it, and I'm making the same amount of money.
Can we vote for that?
And so I absorb all of this stress because I don't know, I'm pissed off at these cocksuckers and people like Joe Biden who are doing all this fucked up shit and burning everything to the ground. But man, it is just so brutal some days. And then you get shit like this where it's like the country is melting down around us, or maybe it's all for show. Maybe it's fake bullshit. Maybe the Texas National Guard.
I got another theory. Maybe you're melting down and the rest of the country is, just things are happening.
He seems quite concerned about legal liability right now.
God knows. Who knows?
I mean, you don't want people saying reckless things on your program. I mean, you don't want, or things that are verifiably like untrue, or like calling someone, a pedophile, or calling for the killing of someone individually.
He shoots from the hip, and he says some crazy things that I wouldn't feel comfortable saying. But
we're not Timcast.
No. We're not Timcast, and I don't have Sush.
This is why Oscar Wilde was a socialist. He wrote in The Soul of Man under Socialism, property not merely has duties, but has so many duties that its possession to any large extent is a bore. It involves endless claims upon one, endless attention to business, endless bother. If property had simply pleasures, we could stand it, but its duties make it unbearable. In the interest of the rich, we must get rid of it. And I think we can all agree with that.
All right, let's.
And then you get shit like this where it's like the country is melting down around us, or maybe it's all for show. Maybe it's fake bullshit. Maybe the Texas National Guard is only fucking around to put on a show to make it seem like they're actually doing something so that people in this country don't rip their heads off. I mean, Brian Kemp certainly didn't do anything to oppose the Biden administration.
That's a real thing.
Fucking around with the elections. Well, so why would we trust him now?
That's the problem. Pretending to do something.
Yeah, okay. Now that dude is like, let's change the subject. Let's change the subject because that is really something. That is really something there. It's Friday, folks. I mean, we can spend a little time just mocking, and listen, I want you to also know, I should just say, we are efforting. That's what we call it in the biz. I spoke to a major industry player who said, when you're trying to get a guest on, you're efforting. We're efforting trying to get Tim Heidecker on just because of his journalism that he did last week regarding Tim's emergency evacuation of his studio to evacuate.
Yeah.
But that is. But yes, and for people who are accusing us for putting Tim through our whiny filter, we did not do that.
No, that's just his natural voice.
But he doesn't sound like, honestly, I mean, not very based of him, Tim Pool, to be worried about monetization and these kinds of things. I thought he cared about free speech. And yet, it always comes down to the bottom line. I guess that's the case.
He could just be playing video games and making $1 million talking about Jussie Smollett, but,
But he has, the weight of the world on his shoulders.
I'm in favor of that.
Yeah, no, take it easy, Tim. Let Moonlord or whatever take over the compound.
Well, I'm sorry that he's not feeling great these days.
Yeah. Well, I had crocodile sentiments coming from you. Totally crocodile sentiments. We all know. We all know that you're not.
That's true.
You go through the trouble of extending hospitality out to people, and they just laugh at you.
I didn't respect the space.
Who's this? 817.
Hello, is this Sam Seder?
Yes, it is. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam, this is Dave Rubin. I just wanted to say I'm sorry that I walked out of that podcast the other day whenever somebody brought you up. I was just, I was kind of scared that if I talked to you, it might put my brain into recovery mode. But, I thought about it a lot, and I decided, Sam, that I'm going to be the bigger man and call into your show and, finally, just crush you in the free marketplace of ideas.
Great.
Wow. So So, Sam, there's a lot of things that you've said about me that I have a pretty big problem with. I know that, you said that you weren't a big fan of my flat tax idea a while back. And, you generally just, you mock my predictions, you call me stupid, you claim that I irresponsibly platform people like Stefan Molyneux. And, I just wanted to, hash a few of those things out.
Okay. Where do you want to start, Dave?
Well, Sam, what was your problem with my flat tax idea? I thought it was a pretty high level idea, personally.
Well, it's regressive. Flat taxes are regressive because if I know this is amazing. This is amazing. We have entered to the future. It's regressive. Flat taxes are regressive, right? Because if everybody pays I guess, if you're talking about on income, the 15% tax, you're still going to have a tremendous wealth inequality.
Well, Sam, isn't it wealth inequality that drives all of the best innovation in America? This is the thing, Sam.
No, Dave,
really,
it's not.
It comes down to
wait, Dave.
People like you are pushing all this. What?
This is amazing. Dave, can you please explain why wealth inequality is necessary for innovation when we had the greatest expansion of the economy in the 50s and 60s during what was known as the Great Compression, where we had the least amount of wealth inequality in this country's history?
Well, Sam, you see, whenever the rich get to do what they want to do with their money, it just results in the best thing for everybody. Now, we can get into, the nuances and, the details of economic policy, but, really the main point here, Sam, is that it's really about freedom. It's about freedom to be, do, and say whatever you want. And people like you push all this, this woke crap and this communism and this control, and people like me are pushing freedom. And this is really
Dave, you just changed
that is behind Trump right now.
Dave, you just changed the topic, right? Didn't you ask me about flat tax and then you changed the topic to freedom?
Listen, Sam, I hang out with really smart people, okay? Like Brett Weinstein and others. And listen, say what you want about me, Sam, but people respect me, okay? And I respect the differences of other people's opinions, on the right. Now, we can get into nuances of like gay rights and, civil rights in general. But, the point here really is freedom. And that's kind of the broader point.
But David, why did you bring up flat tax and then change it to freedom? So you're just against taxes.
Well, Sam, I'm not sure if you've heard of this little philosophy called libertarianism, but, ideally, we would have the lowest amount of taxes that is possible so that the rich can innovate, and people like Elon Musk, who's a very smart guy, by the way. I actually personally, he's a good friend of mine, and so he can take us to Mars eventually.
Let me ask you a question, Dave. When are you concerned about the Republican Party attacking IVF? How do you square the fact that you have 2 children, but the party that you support, this so-called freedom agenda, they're assaulting people's right to determine what they're going to do with their bodies?
Well, Sam, that's just one of those differences of opinion that some people on the right have, and it's, that's one of those things. It's, it's a nuance that we can sort out later. But here's the real thing, Sam.
But wait, David, excuse me. I don't mean to interrupt you.
You want to make things personal?
David,
make things personal.
I'm not making it personal. I'm asking you how you reconcile that. You say it's a difference of opinion, but there's literally now. Operating law in one red state, and you have Project 2025 that wants to make that the law of the land.
Well, Sam, I guess we'll just have to cross that bridge whenever we come to it, because listen, Sam, I can look my partner in the eye and I can tell them, babe, I am making so much goddamn money, and no matter what happens, I'm going to be okay. And listen, Sam, if you want to make this about my personal life, I can make it about yours too, because quite frankly, your set on the Majority Report looks like shit. I'm looking at it right now. My set looks so much better. So not only are my ideas better than yours, but my show just looks better too. You know, you really lack a sense of, what's the phrase? I believe it's mise en scene.
Oh, nice. You've got to be kidding me. Hey, Dave, would you react to this take by Daily Wire host Michael Knowles on IVF treatments? Here, tell me your opinion of this.
The reason surrogacy and IVF are immoral is because they interfere into the family. They break up the nucleus, the very building block of political society. They separate the reproductive from the conjugal act. They establish the domination of technology over the origin and destiny of human life. And they can have all sorts of unintended consequences.
So, Dave, let me ask you, how do you react to that? How do you react to the fact that you are assaulting the nucleus of our political society?
Well, I don't know much about nucleuses, but, I think that states should be able to do whatever they want. And so if there are Christians who want to have a Christian government in their state, I'm totally okay with that. I'm all for freedom. And, But
what about how does that
people love the gas?
How does that allow freedom? Are you saying that there should be no Christians in that state because those non-Christians wouldn't have freedom, would they?
Sam, what have you done in the past 20 years? Aside from Bob's Burgers, honestly, I mean, it was that movie that you were in the 90s, or I believe it was C. Thomas Howell that said that he only hired you because you had this Jewishy accountant look, I believe.
I am just, my mind is blown, but that's accurate. But to be fair, that happened more than 20 years ago.
Sam, listen, here's the thing. I have to go here in a second. I just want to say that, the dial of ideas has been turned down for a long time, but it's quickly moving into the hot position. And I'm not sure if you've ever heard of this person, this philosopher named Ayn Rand. But I think if you would read her work, it would really be enlightening for you and your general, little political cause over there. And I hope that one day you see the light, Sam, and that you too become a libertarian.
I just want to thank you because this has been one of the most amazing things I've ever experienced in my life.
Yeah, thank you.
And email us and tell us how you did this, okay?
Absolutely. Thank you, Sam.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Wow.
That was amazing.
I mean, it was indistinguishable from Dave Rubin, except he was a little bit too intelligent.
He was but that was amazing. That is so terrifying. Benjamin sent me a AI generated thing of him singing "Did It My Way" as Bob's Burgers, and I was just like, dude, fire your agent and hire a lawyer because that's where this is going. But that is nuts. We just want to make it clear, as far as we know, that was not Dave Rubin because Dave Rubin's not that intelligent. Dave Rubin couldn't put together those sentences. But that was amazing. That was amazing. I'm so totally blown away right now. I know this is completely off topic and whatnot, but holy crap. That was amazing.
Yeah.
We'll get to some more calls in a second. I honestly, yes, my mind is in full recovery mode.
Yeah, no, not ironically.
That was amazing. Wasn't that?
Yeah, I like the little like.